green glowing mice, like, wherever you can see their skin that's not covered by fur, because jellyfish DNA, like, creationism doesn't explain that.
There's a whole movement within the scientific community that you don't debate creationists because it's not even worth talking to. It's a very common thing, and it was like universally decided by some secret council of smart people in the 80s or something. I'm making that up. The last question of the debate was made into a graphic I saw floating around on Facebook, which said, the question was posed to both of them, what would make you change your mind? And it's got a picture of Bill Nye, and it says evidence, and it's got a picture of Ken Ham, and it says nothing. I'm like, yeah, that's the big difference right there. We all know the crazy sensationalized version, but what's really interesting to me is how did these highly intelligent people justify it to themselves? These people they're engineers, they're scientists, they're mathematicians, they're smart, they're not stupid, they've just had this philosophy indoctrinated into them as fact rather than as spirituality. Yeah, the belief that molecules worked differently and physics and chemistry worked differently before sin and death happened, and trying to justify the book with what they know about science. So since it doesn't make sense, it must mean that science worked differently, obviously.
Right. And part of my issue was that I'm a history buff before I'm a scientist. That was one of my main interests from once I stopped devouring fiction and got involved in the real world until very, very recently. And some things that he said were just historically inaccurate, like recent history, like the concept of the rationality that he discussed being a Christian concept. One of the main events or eras of time that started modern science, especially modern medicine and like academia, was Moors in Spain. That is within the time range that they're discussing, and we do have like historical records of that being true. That was when they started figuring out that quarantining people and putting people in different areas in hospitals was a good thing. Saying that that's where, that rationality comes from, that the scientific mind frame is somehow a Christian thing, is historically wrong. Europe didn't really do anything until, post 1500 AD. It was just a bunch of monks writing stuff down, and that was it. The rest of it was happening in the rest of the world. We had major scientific innovations in Asia and the Middle East and Northern Africa forever, and then it was Europe. And it wasn't Christianity driving it.
One of the things that really got me that he said was, I'm going to paraphrase, that just because a species has a spontaneous genetic mutation, which makes it more or less likely to survive and reproduce, doesn't mean it evolved. That is the definition of evolution on a micro scale. Evolution is that over a long period of time. It gets more and more isolated. Okay, so if over a million generations that this bacteria, that's all based on genetic research, that is provable.
Right, and he basically discounted the field of genetics, and you can't say that that's not real. Like, we can make mice glow because we can take DNA from, a jellyfish and put it into a mouse and make it glow green. Like, you can't say that that's not real. It's been done. There is hard evidence. I'd like to see you come up with a different explanation for that.
Yeah, I know they used bioluminescent algae for plants.
Like, I don't know, I guess technically that fits within Ken Ham's thing.
It actually, it kind of does, because his argument was that micromutations don't equal evolution, because by his definition, evolution involves new genetic information. So in that situation, since you've taken genetic information from a jellyfish and put it into a mouse, that is adding new genetic information. So that's Ken Ham's definition of evolution, which is not
right.
The definition.
I wish that Bill Nye put the Bible thing a little bit better, because he kept saying into this American English version instead of saying, like, the reason that we have a King James Bible, because King James took them all and rewrote them, and that was after it got translated about 3 times, and that process happened with, like, 4 other people.
Because that would have just started a flame war rather than a dialogue. And he wanted to keep it very polite and respectful. And to Ken Ham's credit, he did keep it polite and respectful. It was much more polite and respectful than some bipartisan debates that I've watched, where people are just yelling at each other and calling each other liars. I was very happy that it did not devolve into that. It stayed very much, I'm making my point, you're making yours, even though I could tell by the end that Bill Nye was having such a hard time taking any of the conversation seriously.
Right. And I think also important to note that Bill Nye said, like, he got asked by someone, why are you even doing this? Because the entire scientific community was like, you shouldn't be doing this because you're legitimizing creationism by even saying that there is a debate to have. There isn't to do this. Bill Nye's response to that was, we have these areas where people don't necessarily know that there's anything else, and he didn't want to debate Ken Ham so much as, tell the young people in that crowd, like, there's something else that you can look at, there's another perspective, and you can go and research that, and maybe that'll interest you, and also, like, to try to, influence people to vote for scientific education in those areas where it's not really an option, and that was his goal. It wasn't actually to win the debate.
I think that was both of their goals, honestly. I mean, as misguided as Ken Ham might be to take that stance, I think that's all he was trying to do, was to say, hey, there's another option. I want to put this out there. I do hope that Bill Nye did well enough at explaining his point that no young people go, maybe Ken Ham was right. I haven't heard that from anyone, but I also respect that I might be in an echo chamber about that.
One friend of mine, a friend of theirs, said that Ken Ham had some valid points, and that concerns me.
I am interested to know what those are.
It's primarily the differences between the sciences that he kept saying, historical versus observational, that there's a difference there, which, like, that is a persuasive argument to people who don't know science very well.
Yeah, that bothered me, because saying that you can't look at evidence today and, reverse engineer that into a good idea of what happened.
Yep. Also, the fact that many Christians do not accept the creationist standpoint, I think that is a really important point, because, like, it is possible to be Christian and to take the Bible as poetry and prose and all of that, and not as the literal word of God. But, you have Christians who believe in the ideas of Christianity as in the morals,
charity, peace, compassion,
and who don't have that conflict with their belief in science, and that's totally, like, sane and good. I think that's awesome. I still want to see a rematch of Ken Ham versus Tim Minchin.
I don't think that would be a polite discourse. I mean, I would definitely like to see Tim Minchin write a song about Ken Ham.